about 12 months ago, you were asked by take up the role of a new directorate within a restructured council administration by the CEO. He'd only been recently appointed himself, Stephen Dunshea. How did you feel about this challenge, and what were your expectations?
Yeah, well, I was supportive of the approach. I mean, what the council has done is combined economic development, tourism, and strategic planning together. So strategic planning was taken away from the DA assessment role and put in with economic development and tourism, because it's driving economic growth, which is the key to moving forwards in this place. And so I thought that made a whole lot of sense. But of course, like any large organisation, and particularly this organisation, you have a lot of siloism. And basically, we had 3 silos grafted together, and the process of sort of streamlining that and making that work better is still occurring. Having said that, I bet it's got some excellent people working with me, strong-willed people, sometimes too strong, Greg, but people who have got a strong track record of achievement within the organisation despite its bureaucratic constraints. And so I was very supportive of the project. It did get delayed for a long period of time. As I said, we had bushfires, and then we had COVID, which came along immediately after the bushfires. And so things sort of got pushed back, which was a shame because we were all ready to go. Eventually the organisation was able to reach a point where it could start to implement this major change, because it wasn't as diverted as it had been, particularly by COVID, where basically everyone just cleared out of the place and went working from home, and it was just a totally different regime.
So can you give us some examples of how that new team coming together is developing the future for the Shoalhaven, from your perspective?
Well, I think that, Greg, and you would know this better than most, organisations like councils and government, state government and federal to a less extent, have a tremendous capacity to facilitate growth in the economy, because they employ large numbers of people, and they often in regional areas, they're one of the biggest employers, and they have powers, which state and local, which do give you the capacity to make things happen, help make things happen. And so what we've been doing is in bringing together this new group, which as I say, is not a perfect fit, and we're still not there yet. We're going through a process of organisational restructuring. But the aim is just to have a much more outcomes focus and using the powers that we have to much better effect. I think people like you, Greg, in the past have sort of battled away on your own a bit and sort of developed a high degree of independence from a lot of everything else that goes on. But I think having the 3 streams together that we have enables us to have a more clearly focused, a clear focus on future directions. And to be specific, I mean, some of the things we've been doing are, for example, council has large land assets, land holdings, and we're just going through and trying to ascertain which of these assets we regard as lazy and which ones we think we could be applied to better use. We're either through sale or through joint ventures or through value adding, through development applications. There's a range of methodologies we can use, and we're engaging, for example, with the Aboriginal community on some of these things to ensure that ambitions are realised. I mean, this place has had a lot of ambitions in the past, a lot of plans, a lot of ideas, and there's been a lot of reasons why they haven't always happened. A good example is the Riverfront Precinct, which we've been working on for the last few months, which has been an ambition of council for the last 20 years. And now we're finally seeing that get some traction and starting to happen, because we've actually put more focus into the area and more resources, and we've got the state government on board, which we didn't have before. So it's about building those partnerships, relationships, getting the right people involved, and making these things happen, and using the planning powers, for example, to make the area, the Riverfront, for example, precinct, and this is a work in progress, make the Riverfront Precinct more conducive to investment. I mean, the private sector is only going to invest if they're going to get a proper return on that investment, and they can be a bit agnostic about where they put their money, but they have choices, and we have to make the Shoalhaven a good choice for them.
Yeah, and I just remind the members out there that if you've got a question of Robert, you can post it up there on the chat. I'm reviewing that, and so will Anna, and we'll work those questions into the interview along the way. So you've talked about the Shoalhaven River and the Nowra waterfront across the city. Are there other examples? I know Mary Jean's on the line here somewhere. She's the president of the Milton Ulladulla Business Chamber, and I think there's projects around the southern end and also around the Bay and Basin. So have you got any of those that you've got your focus on?
Yeah, well, obviously you're planning for the future, and that means more creating opportunity for more jobs and more housing and whatever. Milton Ulladulla, it's a good point you raised, because we brought that into our focus this year. We identified that maybe council hadn't done enough in the past in terms of planning for the future growth of that area, and so we have now brought in dedicated resources, and we've set up a new strategic planning working party within council. And we are, at the moment doing the relevant studies to ascertain what we need to do in terms of future housing and future commercial development and so on. What we did find is that if we hadn't have acted quickly in Milton Ulladulla, that there would have been the availability of housing would have run out in a few years. For example, the availability to build housing and deliver housing would have run out in a few years. So I think we focused on that in the nick of time, because you've got to be a few years ahead of the game. You don't wait till you've got a problem before you try and fix it. And the planning process is incredibly slow when it comes to creating new opportunities for residential development, for example. I've been doing a lot of work over the past 12 months. I was asked to get involved with the urban release areas in the Nowra Bomaderry area, mainly Mossfire Road North and Mossfire Road South. Mossfire Road South has already been developed as a subdivision, and DAs are currently in process, currently in train, and the number of houses in that area will be about 900 once they're developed. Mossfire Road North was much more embryonic when I got involved, and we got it through the Gateway Planning Department's Gateway process late last year, and we're moving towards having the planning proposals finalised this year. So we're trying to fast track it as much as we can, and that will create about 2,500 new residential lots. So all up about around about 3,400, 3,500 residential dwellings that can be built in that area over the next X number of years. So we have to be, there's a lot of hard work that has to go into make it. It may look simple, but there's a lot of hard work that has to go into jumping through all the hurdles you have to get to those points, and they take time. And so by the end of this year, with Mossfire Road North, if we get our planning proposals finalised, I would have been working on that for 2 years. If you were driving along Mossfire Road, you wouldn't have seen any progress whatsoever. But an awful lot of work's gone in over the last couple of years. And so, but we're getting the land ready so it can go to market. And we've got major developers who are already interested in. So that's the other part of the game, is not just doing the detailed groundwork, or laying the necessary groundwork for these developments to happen, but also ensuring that you've got market interest in the sites, and we're pleased to say we have that. And so you're looking at major residential developments in those areas moving forwards in that Nowra Bomaderry area. The Nowra Bomaderry planning went right back to about 2005, but nothing's really happened until more recent times. And so we are trying to accelerate these things as best as we can to meet future demand. And we all know, everyone knows that Nowra currently has not just Nowra, but the Shoalhaven has a major housing problem with the lack of availability of rental and other housing accommodation. So I guess we've all been a bit remiss. No one could have forecast COVID or the impacts of COVID, but we are playing a bit of catch up at the moment. But I'm pleased to say we're actually doing it. We're actually doing the hard yards.
And in recent times, just council's been very active in the grant space and applying for monies from the Australian government and also from the New South Wales state government. And from my personal perspective, I've never seen as much money flowing out to local areas and to businesses as what is currently happening through government. So, we've capitalised on that, and I mentioned before Ulladulla, and I think there's 2 projects down at Ulladulla which will probably get into construction mode within 12 months and probably be delivered within about 18 months. Do you want to just mention those for the people on?
Yeah, it's an important point you make, because whatever you want to call it, economic growth, urban renewal, development, it's a multifaceted beast, and it goes from ranges through a number of options you do to revitalise or grow an area. And council has been very capable in recent times in getting grants from government, both federal and state, but also the grants available have significantly increased. And it's become a real challenge for us actually to be able to keep putting in for these grants, and once we get successfully get awarded the money, to actually deliver within the timelines of those grant requirements. So, but we've been very successful at it. I mean, one of the ones that I particularly like that we're currently awaiting an outcome on in Ulladulla is the Ulladulla Boardwalk, which is about totaling about $6 million. We've applied for grants from both state and federal government. I'm confident we're going to achieve something. We'll get the results of those applications this year. But that's the reason why I like that project, is because it's been around for years and years and years, and no one's ever really been able to, break the deadlock on that one. And Greg, you and your team have done a fantastic job in developing those grant applications and doing the necessary work that goes with them. And I'm very confident we're going to make some progress on that, and because that's about unlocking potential as well as just creating a nice tourist aspect. It also creates development potential. I mean, we haven't always planned and delivered our areas very well, and of course in Ulladulla everything's built facing away from the ocean, which in the CBD, which is a shame. But the Ulladulla Boardwalk will open up some areas to the rear of that shopping strip. And of course, anyone going through Ulladulla would have seen the Pier 32 development, which I'm told surprises me that it took so many years and had so many controversial aspects to it, because it's not that tall a building. It's only about 5 stories, I think. And when you drive past it now, you basically don't even notice it. It blends so well into the topography, into the slope of that land facing the harbour. It's been enormously successful, and I don't know why it took so long and why that represented such a Rubicon for people to cross. But now that Rubicon has been crossed and people can see how successful that's been, a relatively high-rise development for that area, there needs to be a lot more of that, I think. And higher rise development or density is not a bad thing. It's bad if it's done badly. If it's done properly, as that Pier 32 development was, I think, it can be a great success and help to stimulate an area and create more opportunities for people to invest in an area. So one of the things we're also doing in the city is looking at, I mentioned the Riverfront Precinct, but we're also looking at the CBD itself, and we're working on planning proposals at the moment to try and revise the planning controls in the CBD to try and stimulate further investment in the CBD. But we are actively engaged in the CBD revitalisation strategies, and in fact last Friday, taking it down to the micro level, last Friday night we had a Nowra at Night event where we put in about $10,000, and it was a great success. It was just music and food and bringing people into the CBD where normally it would be a ghost town at night. So these are the sorts of things we have to do. There are so many facets to it, and it ranges from the micro, as I said, to music events, or right up to high-rise development.
There is a question up there on the chat from Daniel about how do we attract more young professionals into the area and bring their families so that we increase the professional capacity.
Yeah.
I'd like to add that to a comment that the ability for council to do some of those grant-funded projects is the breadth of expertise we have in our private sector. And I know Graham's online there, but we had to pull together an application and a costing for a job, the Ulladulla Boardwalk, in a very short space of time. I think we had about 5 days to do it. And we prevailed with MI Engineers. They gave us a price. It was competitive. We charged them with doing a costing on this thing, and we had an independent consultant's report with a costing submitted to government. Now, we haven't seen the success of that application yet, but that's we don't have to go out of town to get some of that work done. We can rely on most of that work. And I suppose in the last 12 months, I've spent near enough to $7 or $8 million. And I'm proud to sort of say that 90% of that has been spent locally. So we are delivering those jobs. I suppose starting to round this up, so how would you regard so that comment about those professionals and whatever, but how would you regard success for City Futures? Is it more jobs and business activity, which you've talked about across the Shoalhaven? Is it greater traffic congestion in Nowra, which is a topic of birth of the Business Chamber and others, or the commencement of new residential suburb, which you've mentioned off the Mossvale Road between Bomaderry and Camberwara? So,
yeah. Well, Mossvale Road was one example, but it's happening in other areas. But that's a big one. Look, it's you talk about traffic congestion, for example. If you come from Sydney, then you don't sort of see Nowra as being very congested. But if you live in Nowra all the time, you complain about the congestion, particularly with the impacts of the new bridge and things like that. It is a real issue because we have met with local businesses, and it does impact in a number of ways. And we're lobbying government at the moment, as you're aware, Greg, on this issue. A lot of the focus gets put on a bypass being built around Nowra and Bomaderry, and a lot of focus has been put on the new bridge, but we don't believe the bridge is going to solve the congestion problems. The congestion problems will need to be addressed internally on the Princes Highway and related roads, rather than just the bridge itself. And the government doesn't seem inclined to commit to the Nowra Bomaderry bypass at all at the moment. The corridor that exists for that bypass has been protected for many years by council alone, using its planning powers to ensure development doesn't occur that impacts on that proposed corridor. But the state government has not even included it into a lot of its forward planning, as I understand. So, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done on that one. But I can't complain about the state government. The money they've been spending on highway upgrades and the new bridge, and the money they're proposing to spend on a new hospital, these are fantastic aspects, fantastic boosts to the local economy. And as Greg was saying, the more local work we can get out of this, the better. In terms of the future, and young professionals and whatever, COVID has been a learning experience for all of us. And what it's shown is, for those who didn't know it before, I did, but I don't think some people in council didn't realise this, is that you just don't have to be in a fixed place to do a job. You can actually be anywhere in the world and do certain types of work, and because technology allows you to do that. I recall doing an MBA many, many years ago at a university in Melbourne that I've never visited in my life. and I don't think I ever met any other students. It was done totally online, and it was a great way of learning. And so technology's been around for many years to enable people to work remotely, but it hasn't always been taken up by business or by government organisations. COVID didn't give us the choice. COVID forced us to take it up, forced Shoalhaven Council to take it up. And then suddenly a few hundred people were wondering why we weren't doing this for many years before. Greg, people like Greg, we can't even get back to the office. So it did improve productivity in many ways, enable people to function effectively, despite the fact you had to socially distance. And so I think that's changed our view of the world moving forwards. And there has been a migration of people down to the areas like the Shoalhaven, but it's creating some of these impacts that I mentioned earlier, and a lack of availability of housing. I mean, we struggle in recruiting people from outside of the Shoalhaven when they come here to find somewhere to live. So we've just got to, get on our bikes in terms of delivering more housing stock to the market, and or helping that happen. And we are playing it. We are a bit behind the game because COVID's brought things forward in a significant way. In terms of COVID, I mean, you read a lot about vaccination, and everyone thinks, well, that's going to solve the problem. But our estimation is that we won't be getting into what you might call the new normal until about 2024, 2025 and onwards. And so we've got a long way to go yet to get out of the situation. I mean, things are moving forwards, and that's good, and people will eventually be vaccinated, but there's still some time to go before we reach that level of new normal. But what I am sure of is that the new normal won't be like the old normal, and there'll be a much more flexible approach to work and where people work from. And smart employers will take advantage of that. They'll understand that where people can be more effective working from home, no matter where that home is, that's a better way to go than requiring people to come into, say, a fixed office every day of the week.
All right. Holly's asked a question there about the provision of education in new schools as the population increases, and do we take that into account in our planning to expand the populations? And just to comment on that one for starters.
Yeah, well, I'm not a strategic planner, but that's one of the things they do. Obviously, they do everything they do. Strategic planners do is based on studies. And it's not just about creating land for development. It's also about what infrastructure do you need, what services do you need, whatever and whatever. Of course, education is a state government responsibility. And so we work closely with the state government on these issues. But yes, you have to make sure that there is that ability to provide the services that people need. Now, I've had first-hand experience that I brought into a major residential development in Sydney a number of years ago, and they built the houses and the people came, but they didn't have the schools to cater for the kids. And so my two of my youngest children were going to primary school that was seriously overcrowded until a new school could get built. So there was you've got to be get your planning right on those things, otherwise you find yourself in a problem. But Holly, you're absolutely right. These elements of the infrastructure picture have to be very much in our focus, but we don't deliver those facilities as a council.
And I can relate to that. It's even happening in Sydney. I've got a grandchild in a primary school up in that Hornsby area, and they're in a 3-story primary school, and that's in Sydney because the population in the area wasn't available, so they had to go up. So
yep.
It's a bit of a change to what we all went to primary school, be it in Sydney or elsewhere. Very different in a 3-story type operation.
Yep.
Right, and Anna had one there about Regional Australia Institute of pushing this move to the regions, but I think you've already sort of hit that on the head a bit, in that yes, it's there. Shoalhaven's an attractive place, but we've got the housing issues, which is right across the board across Australia. I don't think anybody's got the housing issues nailed. So
no, and it's not just building the housing; it's building affordable housing. That's the big challenge. I mean, housing is significantly unaffordable for a lot of people, particularly in the lower socio-economic brackets. And one of the things we are doing as part of our City Futures strategy is trying to make sure that we also create more affordable housing, and we can use that, our capacity as a landowner, to achieve that. So we've actually got two major projects we're dealing with at the moment. I can't really talk about because they haven't been announced, but council are using its land, partnering with other agencies and community housing providers to ensure that we, as much as we're capable of, increase the amount of affordable housing. But I'm a bit pessimistic. I tend to think that no matter what we do, we're always, drop of water in the ocean when it comes to affordability. But you do what you can, but the government needs to be doing a hell of a lot more, federal and state.
I know. So it's been interesting speaking with you, Robert, this morning. And we've handled the questions that have been up there on the chat. There's been a few of them. So I, again, on behalf of the Shoalhaven Professional Business Association, which council is a member and has been from day one, and we're very pleased that you could join us this morning and give us a bit of an insight on your perception of where you think the Shoalhaven could go, and may have lived up to those expectations, go in a completely different direction. That's the interesting thing in this strategic planning space. So
we're getting there. We're seeing very strong signs of good progress.
Yeah. Righto. So I thank you for your questions, ladies and gents, and thanks, Robert, for being here. I'll hand back to you again, Anna, but just before I do that, there will be more of these. I think from the committee's perspective, we've seen that we can bring interesting stories to you, so I'll probably deliver another 2 or maybe 3 throughout the year, and we'll bring those to you as different examples of what local businesses have done or are doing. So back to you, Anna.
Fantastic. Thank you, Greg. And yes, Robert, thank you very much